You're listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. To guide us through the intricacies and intersections of emotions, relationships, and male identity is renowned psychologist, author, and speaker Gunter. This is Inspire Change.
Before I begin the actual podcast, I would like to respectfully acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which I work. I would also like to pay my respects to their elders past and present. Welcome everybody to another podcast on Inspire Change. So the last couple of podcasts I've been talking about dispelling negative narratives, and I used to date two therapies that I think are really useful in that regard. One is acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT for short, and the other one is rational emotive behavior therapy, REBT. They're both evidence-based psychotherapies and have proven themselves to be of excellent use and utility in the course of helping people overcome issues like anxiety, depression, social anxiety, a whole host of psychological disorders. And one of the things that I suggested earlier on was that a lot of the very successful therapies actually have some commonalities built into them. So I'm going to take a little departure and actually talk about how we can use Zen Buddhism as a way of also dispelling these negative narratives, these fairy tales that we have in our head that disturb and distress us. I'm not going to be using, because someone said to me the other day, are you talking about B.J. Fogg's acronym Zen? And I said, no. B.J. Fogg is a behavioral scientist who wrote a really interesting book on tiny habits and how useful they are. I'm not going to be talking about him at this point because I want to go and use some of his material in another podcast. What I'm talking about is Zen. And so, what is Zen Buddhism? Well, Zen is a practice that originated in China and later became very, very popular in Japan. Its fundamental principles involve mindfulness and meditation, things that help to calm the mind and bring us into the present moment. Zen emphasizes the importance of direct experience over intellectual understanding and teaches us to let go of our attachments to thoughts and beliefs. Now, I'll get a little bit further into that down the track. So how, you're probably going, well, how can I use that to get rid of these negative narratives in my head? Fundamentally, 3 steps that are core. And remember, in many other podcasts, I've talked about the primacy of self-awareness. So again, here in Zen practice, the first step is self-awareness. A lot of us are not aware of the negative stories that we hold in our head. It's really interesting. When I work with people in therapy, it's often a process of really peeling the onion and then getting the person to articulate these buried negative attitudes, beliefs, opinions they hold, especially about themselves. So the awareness principle here is paramount. A lot of times we actually think that what we're telling ourselves is true, but in reality, they're simply mental constructs that we've created. And by observing those thoughts without judgment, and this is very, very important in the whole process, whether it's through Zen, whether it's through ACT, or whether it's in any other form of psychotherapy, that lack of observation, of thinking without judgment, is a very, very important beginning. Through that process, what's going to happen is we're going to have a greater understanding of what's going on and a greater understanding of the nature of these ideas, beliefs, opinions, assumptions. The next step is to begin to challenge our negative narratives, we need to question the validity of our beliefs and recognize that they're not necessarily true. And like in the other therapies, this is done by meditating on the idea of is this thought really true? How do I know it's true? What evidence supports it? And so by going through that process, these negative narratives begin to loosen their grip on us. Now you can take the next step, and there's a couple of permutations on this, and begin to replace them with like positive ones. This can be done through the practice of affirmations or positive self-talk. For instance, if your negative narrative is that I'm not good enough, you can replace it with I'm worthy and capable of achieving my goals. Now, here's a little word of warning. You've got to be clear of a couple of things. One is it believable? So, for example, in some therapies, one of the things that I introduce into the dialogue is that when you tell you these things, how believable are they? So on a scale of 0 to 10, 0 being completely unbelievable and 10 being it totally, where would you rank it? And in the beginning, a lot of times we fluctuate, often around the middle or even less. So unless this gets traction, and it may take some time to get traction, doing that exercise to dispel negative narratives actually isn't going to work that well. The other thing that's really important is that when you create a positive narrative instead of a negative one, it's got to be feasible. It's got to be, specific and a bit like goals, smart goals. So it's specific, it's measurable, it's action-oriented, realistic, and time frame. And you can massage that in with that affirmation or that positive self-talk. If you're not doing that, you can run the risk of just spinning your wheels because you're not going to get any traction with it. Now, if you repeat these things regularly, and I'm talking about the well-constructed ones, you can begin to reprogram your mind and therefore shift your perspective on yourself and the world that you inhabit. So let's get a little bit more in depth. One of the things that I think is absolutely fundamentally important in most of our journey to wellness is some form of mindfulness and meditation, or mindfulness meditation brought together. Now, this involves focusing on the present moment and observing your thoughts. Now, again, by practicing that regularly, we begin to learn more about the points of origin of these negative narratives and how they impact us, and how to begin to undo them. The other aspect in Zen, which I think is again really, really useful, is self-inquiry. This involves asking ourselves questions such as, who am I? What is the nature of my mind? In Zen, we use teaching stories, koans, even haiku is a form of beginning to facilitate a more nimble mind. And this is where I come back to the framework that I use within the therapeutic process, which is negative narratives are rigid, right? What we want to be is flexible. We want to be sort of like a mental ninja who can, through stealth at times, sneak up to these negative narratives and go, gotcha. This is where the problem that I have lies. What is my true nature? And can I begin to unravel the illusions created by these negative narratives? Lots of stuff in our head are actually fundamentally illusions. They're not necessarily real, evidentiary way. Now, the other part that I think is really, really important in the Zen process is that, we need to let go of our attachments. Now, in Buddhism, we talk about suffering emerges through attachment. Now, in the West, we've sort of taken that, into the realm of material attachment. So, I mustn't be attached to my car or, this thing that I've cherished. Now, that's probably well and true. I don't have any sort of beef with that. But the real teaching, in a sense, in my interpretation, is that I fundamentally need to let go of my attachment to negative thoughts, negative feelings, and negative behaviors. So, we've been talking about negative narrative. They leave us feeling negative in a way, distressed, disturbed. So it's like one step after another. Similarly, my negative actions, for example, if I'm trying to cut down on alcohol or give it up altogether, having 6 to 8 drinks isn't going to do that. But if I set a limit and say, I'm not attached to drinking heavily, I need to let go of that. How am I going to let go of it? What is going to help me and support me in letting go of that? I can begin to create more positive actions. So I might just have a glass. Now, some people can't do that. They just need to not drink. Okay? So in that case, their negative behavior is the result of a dependency, right? A negative attachment to a whole range of things internally. And it often means, a very negative relationship with self, or experiencing an emptiness where self should be, perhaps. So that's a really important aspect in the whole process. So let me begin to wrap this up, because I want you, again, like with all the others, to review the key takeaways from the podcast and put it into practice. Try these things out. Now, as I said, there's some similarities, and always come back to the similarities that are about our relationship with ourselves, the stuff that we think, we believe, we have opinions about, our judgments, and whether they serve us or not, and how to actively and intentionally work with them. So in getting rid of these negative narratives, these illusions that we've created in our mind, in using Zen, you firstly need to become aware of your thoughts. Practice observing your thoughts without judgment. Don't go, oh, this is good, bad. Just put it out there. Look at it. No judgment. Challenge that negative narrative. Question your beliefs, and recognize that these may not be true. In fact, they could be the very source of your disturbance and your distress. In fact, most of the time, I would argue that they are. Now, incorporate a practice of non-attachment and impermanence to these ideas. Recognize that thoughts and emotions are constantly changing. They're impermanent. And then they're not really good or bad. Right? You can develop a greater sense of equanimity and reduce their attachment to negative thoughts. And then ultimately, practice mindfulness and self-inquiry. Now, the final step in many respects is look at surrounding yourself with positive, calming influences. This can include spending time with a supportive friend and family, reading inspiring books. Reading is really, really important. Contemplation, the study of inspiration. And yes, we can study inspiration. Because it's from that, what inspires some people doesn't inspire me. So I have to look at what it is that inspires me. You know, these days we're fortunate, we've got so much different media that we can pick and choose, like listening to uplifting podcasts, to inspiring podcasts. But most importantly, create an environment wherein this process, or any process that you choose that's going to develop your growth, your well-being, and your spirit, in a sense, can flourish. All right, as always, I hope you enjoyed this podcast. I hope it's inspired you. Please listen to it. Hopefully you can inspire others as well. Share the podcast. I'd really appreciate that. If there is anything, please contact me. You have the details on how to do that. But by all means, let's see if we can create a community of inspiration. And until next time, this is me, Gunter, signing off.
Thank you for listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. For more information on the Making Good Men Great movement, or for individual or group coaching sessions with Gunter, visit makinggoodmengreat.com. For inquiries regarding broadcast topics or appearing on the show, email Miranda@noirtainment.com. That's Miranda at NOIRTAINMENT.com.